And welcome back to the OHIO podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Buckeye Boggs. That man over there is the wild man, Chris Wilds. He's so cool. He's even got to wear the shades at nighttime. Hey, you might not be watching this at night, though, but if you are, you will agree it is going to be an incredibly unique season in the Big Ten because it's no longer 10, it's no longer 12, it's no longer 14, Chris. We have 18 teams in the Big Ten, 4 of which
just for now.
Yeah, that's right. By the time this video posts, it might be more 22. Than that. 4 of which are from the West Coast, and we are going to talk about the UCLA Bruins today, and a huge preview for all of you who watch the OHIO podcast. This is year number 5 of our previews, Chris. We've been doing this for 5 years. We have the Bruin Source Podcast coming on here in just a few minutes. I had a very lengthy but an entertaining interview with them where they really go in the weeds on Chip Kelly, on Justin Fry, on their roster, where they are at coming into the Big Ten, what their expectations are, and things of that nature. And so it is going to be incredibly interesting for a lot of you, I think. It is, like I said, it's a very lengthy interview, but I had such a doggone good time talking to all of them that I couldn't help myself. We just had to do it. We had to go that long. All right, Chris, let's dive into the history of UCLA. Some of you might not know them other than the fact we've played them a few times in the Rose Bowl. But last year, the UCLA Bruins were 8-5 overall. They were 7-5 in the regular season, 4-5 in the Pac-12. Chip Kelly was their head coach. He's now the offensive coordinator here at Ohio State. Deshaun Foster takes over. It's his first season as head coach of his alma mater that plays in Pasadena, California. The university is in Los Angeles. They do play in the Rose Bowl, Chris, which is the most iconic stadium in all of college football, if you ask me my opinion, next to the Horseshoe. With a capacity of 80,816, but let's be honest, most home games for UCLA, they're lucky to get half that here in the recent years. UCLA has a winning record of 637 victories all time to 446 losses, 37 ties. Their bowl record is 17 wins, 20 losses, and 1 tie, and they have 17 conference titles to their name. Chris, what are your thoughts about the UCLA Bruins as they embark on their inaugural season here in the Big Ten Conference?
Well, I'll tell you, Eric, I mean, I'm not real confident in what they can do this year. UCLA, I think, brings a great deal to the table in the sport of basketball. Football-wise, I think there's a lot of questions to be answered, and I don't think that they're going to like the answers this year. But you know what? Hey, at least, if nothing else, one of my favorite TV actors actually played quarterback for UCLA back in '72. Mark Harmon.
Okay.
That's the one thing I'll give him.
Gotcha. All right. Some old man trivia there brought to you by the Wild Man. All right. We're going to dive into this interview. I want to warn of you, this is very lengthy. It's over an hour. If you need to pause, come back to this thing. I got you. But this is incredibly interesting. It was riveting to me, the depth that these guys gave me on their answers on UCLA as a whole, and the demise of the Pac-12, the link they have with us with the coaching staff, and where they view themselves. You're going to really enjoy this. Hang tight, everybody. And welcome back to the OHIO podcast, everybody. And now I'm joined by our special guest today from the Bruin Source, a sister podcast on the College Huddle with us, and new Big Ten members from out in Los Angeles, Bruin Source. They cover the UCLA Bruins, which is obvious. I'm sure you all can tell. Kevin, Zaid, thank you so much for joining us as we break down the upcoming season for the newest member in the Big Ten, UCLA.
Thanks for having us. Excited to be here. We're really excited to be here, and super conference realignment's weird in one way, but one of the great parts about it is we get to go on these kind of shows and talk about UCLA and the West Coast to fans that maybe haven't watched it for a while. So it's a lot of fun.
Excellent. Before we dive into all the questions that I sent you guys preemptively, I do want to get your take on some of the other Pac-12 members who didn't get invited to the Big Ten and your feelings about how that all went down and about them, because I'm sure we'll talk within this discussion about the three who are in the Big Ten with you from the Pac-12, but just your overall feelings of how it all went down and your fellow members who are now scattered between the ACC, the Big 12, and the two lone ones out there flying the Pac-2 flag now. Those guys, gosh, I get my hats off to them, man. They are out there waving that Pac-12 banner still.
Yeah, I think they officially changed a bunch of the logos and stuff out on the websites today. I think they even tweeted out just like Oregon State and Washington State on the Pac-12 old Twitter. So yeah, it was kind of like the official changing of the guard there. Kevin, I'll let you talk first. I have some opinions on some of the former Pac-12 teams, but you probably have a little bit more of a level-headed take first. I'll start there, and then we can go from there.
I mean, I said this on some of the other shows we've done, we could do a whole podcast on this one subject itself. Zed and I have done a whole podcast on this one subject itself, right? I mean, the Pac-12 for many years, bad leadership from its administrators. You had a lot of schools go through a lot of hubris where they kept bad coaches around much longer than it needed to be around. I mean, you go back to the Pac-12 in about 2008-9. The coaches in the league were Pete Carroll, Chip Kelly, Oregon Chip Kelly, not the guy we're about to talk about today, but Oregon Chip Kelly, Jim Harbaugh at Stanford. I mean, the coaching in the league was top notch, and the story then was very different because again, for the audience that doesn't know, I grew up watching the Big Ten. I grew up a Michigan fan in the West Coast, and the story then for me was very different. I had to hear it from all the Pac-10 and Pac-12 fans about how terrible the Big Ten is. And the story was kind of reversed then. And, you then go to the most critical period in collegiate athletic history where the Pac-12 went through its worst 8 to 10 year run in football, combined with a bunch of bad decisions from its administrators. The Pac-12 networks was a complete money sink. And all of these things collided last year or a year and a half ago. It's sad because, we're going to talk about a lot of UCLA for this season, but UCLA had a history of competing against these schools for about 100 years. It wasn't a short amount of time. And we have so much in common with all these other schools. Their alumni live in Los Angeles. They live in California. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of friends and coworkers that went to all these places. We have much less of that with the Big Ten schools, and hopefully we'll grow it over time, right? But that's the part that I think is going to be weird. As for the actual schools themselves, I think everyone kind of found their landing spot. I mean, the schools that went to the Big 12 geographically, I could have found an alternate world where they were actually in the Big 12. So geographically, I don't think it was like that far apart, like for those four schools. The coastal schools joining the Big Ten in no world ever made sense. Like that was before this era, right? I mean, USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. There were a lot of events that led to the fall of the Pac-12, but when they lost LA, when they lost USC and UCLA, their days were numbered, and that's just that is what it was. I mean, Oregon, I'm not here to take shots at any fans or anything, right? But like Oregon very famously said, like in contract negotiations, we will never be in a league where we take less money than UCLA. And USC and UCLA left, and lo and behold, now like they got to find a new home, and that's what's happened, right? Because that was the power of the LA TV market to the Pac-12. It's the second largest metropolitan area in the country. You don't need to have all 20 million people watching. You just need to have like a percentage of that watching, and you have more than like others in the country. So, the fact that they're all joining, I think geographically it makes no sense, but it's the Big Ten's a great brand. There is a lot of history between like some of these schools, playing in the Rose Bowl for many years. Mm-hmm. UCLA's played against a lot of Big Ten schools over the years, again, like in the 70s through the 90s, like in the Rose Bowl and such. USC's done all that. So we have some history there. And so from that standpoint, it makes sense. It's just, I think overall a very sad thing, because I hope this all goes well with the Big Ten. I look forward to a lot of things about this. But I think fundamentally it will always be a Midwestern league in some ways. And, the fact that we don't have a West Coast power league based in the West Coast that's about the West Coast, I think is sad. But that said, there's a lot of parts about this I'm looking forward to.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with basically mostly what Kevin said, and I echo his sentiments that it was sad to see the Pac-12 go. In terms of some of the schools, look, not playing Cal and Stanford every year is going to feel very weird just because we've been doing it for nearly 100 years. There are other California schools. Cal is in our the same school system as us, and not seeing them is bizarre. I mean, that being said, a couple of those schools have shot themselves in the foot, and UCLA is paying literally directly for some of those mistakes, with Cal especially. So, some of those things have kind of, I think, made some fans, including myself, a little bit more indifferent towards the direction or futures of those schools. But it is what it is. I think there's other rivalries that are being lost that we're trying to retain, right? Things like UCLA, Arizona in basketball. Arizona's going to the Big 12 now, but we're trying to do a yearly neutral site game with them. So, losing all of that sucks. But like Kevin said, I think most UCLA fans are excited for the new matchups. There is some history there. Looking forward to creating new history, new rivalries. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, there's with all this change and sadness, there's a lot of opportunity and new rivalries and memories to make in the Big Ten. So excited to forge forward now. I think it was definitely something that needed to happen for UCLA's survival. So if it meant having to leave the Pac-12, then so be it. Like that, it is what it is. So yeah.
Those are very insightful answers, fellas. And you talk about losing some of those rivalries, but also having some historical rivalries. A lot of the old timers who are Buckeye fans talk a lot about, I think it's 1975. It might be somewhere in there, 74, 75, 76, somewhere in the middle 70s. UCLA and Ohio State played each other twice. Regular season, Rose Bowl, we split the games. UCLA cost Ohio State a national championship by beating us in the Rose Bowl. And so there's some old-timers who still talk about that UCLA kept Archie from getting a national championship, the only two-time winning Heisman Trophy winner. So there, even though none of us were born then, that's something that a lot of those old-timers hold on to. And when we go out to the Rose Bowl or you come to the Shoe in the future, that'll be talked about, that stoking that flame again. And I look forward to what it will look like on television when you have UCLA's jerseys going up against Iowa's jerseys and the clash of those colors that we normally never get to see. Like, I always love when UCLA and USC play each other because they wear their home jerseys against one another. It looks beautiful on television. And there's some classic colors in the Big Ten. I think it's going to be fascinating television. But at the same time, I understand your sentiment. And if this were to happen to the Big Ten, losing UCLA and USC would essentially be like losing Ohio State, Michigan. The Big Ten would not exist without those two. And now, with everything that's coming together, I don't think they're done. I think college football realignment is going to continue. We're going to eventually end up with 3 and then maybe down the road 2. And we're going to have NFL-like, guys. It is what it is. We are heading that way. And so even though right now I think it hurts the West Coast to feel what you feel, hold tight. Yeah. You're going to get it back again one way or the other.
Totally agree with you. Yeah.
It's going to be
wild. Totally agree. I think
be wild.
I think in some ways, like the Big Ten, maybe even incentivized to build more of a West Coast presence than like other leagues, because you've already started it now. I said this on another show. I could see a world, Zed and I have talked about this, where you recreate essentially the Pac-12 back in the Big Ten, right? Like I could see that happening, because I mean for the long term, sustainability of the league. Like when Oregon and USC have to continuously travel time zones to play these other schools, and they only have to do it like a couple times a year, eventually like they may get upset about that, right? And so for the sustainability of the league to have more West Coast schools, like I think there's potential there. I think there's a lot of, again, for the Big Ten, like-minded schools on the West Coast that like fit in the overall brand of it. So I could see where all of that. I'm totally with you. This thing's not done. I mean, Zed and I talk about this all the time. Like this is not done. UCLA survived round one. We took the jump to the Big Ten before we were forced to be given a bad choice. But now I think there's still work to do there, because round two I think is going to be uglier than round one. When this list dwindles down to like a certain number of schools that can like realistically participate in the highest level of athletics. So
I mean, you saw it immediately, right? I mean, the ACC is all infighting at this point, and that's going to break apart at some point. I don't see how that's going to be sustainable, and that was immediate.
Any day now.
Right.
We could get that, Pete Thamel tweet. It's done.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's crazy, man. And, I really do look for the same thing to happen to the ACC. And when it does, I will be very interested to see how Oregon State and Washington State react to those schools that were in the ACC who don't have a home now, and how do they gobble that up with the Mountain West? And it'll be it's going to be incredibly interesting. But what else is interesting is your football team, and no, I'm serious. Like there's not a lot of juice. Let's just say that for a big time season for you guys. You're under new leadership, and Ohio State is, for better or for worse, tied to that through Chip Kelly. And so let's dive into that, guys. Let's start. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. Give me the Chip Kelly story from your point of view as UCLA fans, and why or why not Ohio State fans should be happy or weary.
I don't have a lot of nice things to say about Chip Kelly, so I'll start there. And
tell.
This is well documented on our show for a few years now. I think when we hired Chip Kelly to UCLA, it was a really, really exciting hire for the Bruins. I think Kevin and I, amongst most UCLA fans, were really, really excited. He was the biggest name in that coaching cycle that was on the market. SEC schools like Florida were after him, and somehow UCLA was able to nab him. After that, I think the excitement very quickly died. When Chip Kelly basically decided to tear the program down to the studs for really inexplicable reasons, I think a lot of UCLA fans kind of lost the train, lost the momentum with him. The multiple losing seasons, the lack of recruiting over those seasons, I think it was very clear that it was becoming unsustainable. And even when he had those 2 or 3 winning seasons, 8-9 win seasons, it was clear like this was not going to remain, because he was just beating up on soft schedules, and we did not have the talent foundation to actually keep winning, especially with the Big Ten on the horizon. And I'll speak for myself. I'll let Kevin chime in here, but I was frustrated and done with him like 3 years ago, I think. And it was, I think we held on to him too long. I think we probably should have let him go a couple of years ago, but he stayed as long as he did. Left at the worst time possible that you could probably leave as a head coach to jump to Ohio State. And even with that, I think we were all just kind of happy. Like I truly took a sigh of relief of, oh my God, he's actually gone from UCLA. even with the bad timing, even with the recruiting impacts, just the fact that he was no longer coach at UCLA was just a sigh of relief for me, because I don't think he would have done very much in the Big Ten, and I think we would have been really, really putrid going into the season. But yeah, that's my take on Chip Kelly. Now, from an offensive coordinator standpoint for Ohio State, I actually think he will do probably pretty well there. I think one thing he was still able to do at UCLA was put together good offenses. And now if you take away the recruiting responsibilities, the donor relations stuff that he absolutely hated doing,
that's well documented.
Sorry?
I said that's well documented.
Right. Very well documented. Even back to Oregon, right? But you throw in things like NIL, right? He just didn't want to engage with it. So not having the responsibility to do things like that. If he is purely looking at X's and O's, scheming, coming up with plays, I think he can be really successful there.
Yeah, we've as UCLA fans had our healing with this, but understandably, Big Ten country, like, it's a really intriguing subject because he's not only left UCLA, he's gone to another Big Ten team and one of the bigger high-profile teams of the league at that. I think the most helpful thing that we can do here is just like talk about the narrative and then talk about whether they were true or not, right? So the first thing, hey, he had to tear down the program to the studs to then bring it back to this level that, hey, they won, 8-9 games the last few years. The tearing to the studs, you have to realize exactly how much he tore it to the studs. It was the worst 3-year run in UCLA football since the 50s, early 50s. So you can always have the season where you tear it down to the studs. You can't have 3 of them, right?
I think it was even older than that. I think it was pre-World War II,
right? So, we're talking historical levels of losing here that he tore it down to. And I think this leads us into the second thing where he's only leaving because he doesn't want to do NIL and he doesn't like talking to donors. His record was worse before NIL. Chip Kelly was consistently not wanting to do his job as a college football coach. He liked a very specific part of his job, which was scheming and diagramming plays. If you look at all the other aspects of being a head coach, our defense was triple digits in most statistical categories for years. We had coaches that were never held accountable for that because they were his friends, if we're just being straight about it, right? Coaches that were just there year after year, despite being in the hundreds and the 90s and in most defensive categories. And you look at the actual 8, and there's 2 8-win seasons, 1 9-win season. First off, this last year, how do you end up with this? You have a losing record in conference play, and yet you win 8 games. The only way that's possible is if, the best analogy I can give to Big Ten fans is it's like that Big Ten West team that just avoids Ohio State and Michigan, for a couple years, and maybe they avoid Penn State too. And so you win your 7-3 pillow fights against your own teams, and then you might any team with a winning record, you lose to them, but at the end of the day you go 8-4, right? And I think that's basically what happened to UCLA for a couple of years. Any coach that sticks around for 6 years, eventually you get that kind of a schedule, and eventually you're going to get a couple of years in there where you have the one season with all the 5th-year seniors and some transfers and whatnot, and you get those seasons in there. The best way to sum it up, these past 3 years, UCLA has won 2 games against conference opponents that finish with a winning record. 2. So 8-9 wins, great. How many Power 5 teams would have won more than 2 conference games against teams that finished 500 or better? I would argue a lot of them would. The vast majority of them actually would. I haven't looked that one up, right? But I would. And so that's where it's really hard to take a coach that clearly doesn't care to do his job. UCLA's recruiting profile historically, these are all there for everyone to see, right? Before he got there, it was a consistent top 20 recruiting program, top 15 recruiting program in a lot of years, consistently. And so when you see like the results that we had, at first you're like, all right, well, maybe he's trying to look for a certain type of player and whatnot. But the results actually, he wasn't offering players. He wasn't spending time actually recruiting after the fact. So, all aspects besides like one small thing, like he disliked about being a head coach. And I live in the Bay Area now. You talk to Niner fans, they would tell you the same thing about Chip Kelly when he was with the 49ers. I think the next thing I can help with here, because again, I grew up a Michigan fan, so I know a lot about the whole rivalry and all that, right? And so how will Chip Kelly do at Ohio State? I don't say a lot of nice things about Chip Kelly. I'll give him one small thing, which is this, because I think the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 thing on Ohio State fans' minds right now is we need to beat Michigan next year.
You nailed it. Yep.
Right. And so I would say Chip Kelly's game plans going into the rivalry game, our rivalry game, right, against SC, usually were pretty good. And that's when you actually saw like the creativity and stuff like come out, like, but I'll quickly caveat that with he went 500 in those games. If something, he always started well. If something happened in the middle there where like you got to adjust, that never really happened. And so like that's where things trailed off. I'm interested to see how it goes at Ohio State. I think he can do well there because, again, for one, I think Brady Hoke can do good as the offensive coordinator of Ohio State next year, just given how good of a roster it is, right? Like, I think, there's just so much talent there. I think that, he does have, enough, offensive play calling and such where I think he'll coordinate a good offense there. The main thing to look out for is just, ever since he left the Philadelphia Eagles, this has been a lazy individual. He hasn't really cared to do his job. And and if there's a loss that happens in the middle of the year, you'll notice that it doesn't hurt him. It hurts all you, but it doesn't hurt him. And that's, as a fan, the hardest thing to take, right? Like, how can a coach not be disappointed at the results or seemingly disappointed at the results when like you are? So that's a lot. Again, I'm sure there's more I could even get into beyond that.
I'll add one more thing.
Sure.
Be prepared for some wonky formations once in a while that you'll look at and be like, this makes zero sense. Why are there 11 tight ends on the field? Just be prepared for that. And it'll probably fail, but it might work once in a while for like a 30, 40, 50-yard gain. But just prepare yourself for some weird stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about one more coach we have in common. That's Justin Fry, offensive line coach. Not on everybody's Christmas card list in Columbus, Ohio currently. How did he do at UCLA? What's your opinion of Justin Fry?
I can tell you this, because I know Ohio State's fans' opinion of him. I think he misses on every recruiting target that he goes after.
Feels like it.
Right. And, unless you get a player in like their 5th year, doesn't seem like much development's really going on.
Nailed it.
And that's what happened at UCLA. So,
yeah.
And this is part of the thing, right? Like, if you do your homework on this and like kind of look beneath the layers for like what's been going on at UCLA, you'll find out like the papers and the cracks. On the surface level, there's been some stuff that like, opposing fan bases haven't like gotten. I get why. I wouldn't understand it about another school, right? So like I get why. Justin Fry. That there was one year when we had a really good running attack with Zach Charbonnet and everything, and a bunch of 5th-year offensive linemen.
Yes.
Beyond that, he was mediocre, and so I would say more or less what he's been at UCLA was what translated at Ohio State so far.
Gotcha. Is that anything to add to that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, with Justin Fry, it was interesting when we first got him. There was a little bit more life to recruiting, I think, with the O-line. But that being said, when you look at the baseline, we went from 0, right? What was happening before it came. So, like, there was nowhere to go down from. So just having him there, actually having a guy pay a little bit of attention, made it look a lot better than it actually was. I think the results on the field, like Kevin said, pretty mediocre until we had experienced talent on the team 1 year or two that we did. Then, we had good running attacks, a decent line that played well. But it's hard to attribute that to Justin Fry's development more so than just having older, bigger guys and a couple of key transfers coming in. And so him jumping to Ohio State and him not doing as well, or really the same, is not that surprising. It's just being done at a much more prominent level, so people are just noticing it more. But at UCLA, no one was talking about it except for us sickos who are following UCLA football.
All right, so many moons ago, I've played fantasy football since 2001. It's a long time. I owned a running back on my fantasy football team named Deshaun Foster. And lo and behold, I go, wait a minute, I know this guy because he played for the Boggs Bombers one time, a long time ago, when we won a championship. Tell me about Deshaun Foster and the excitement around him and the UCLA football program with his rise to the leadership as head coach for the Bruins.
Yeah, I can start us off here. I think he's brought a lot of life to a program that felt cadaverous at this point. Like, the fans were not disinterested. Even someone like myself, who is, I would consider a diehard, I run this podcast with Kevin, right? I was finding myself disinterested in UCLA football. Like, it was hard to get up to watch games, to go out to the Rose Bowl to watch a game. And Deshaun Foster's hiring has instantly kind of jolted the fan base a little bit, from both an excitement perspective and also donor NIL perspective as well. He is just, he's not a guy who is super, animated or anything, but he's just super personable. He seems down to earth, and ultimately he seems real, and he seems like he wants to be there. He obviously, played at UCLA at a high level, loves the school, and all of that comes through. And I think he understands that he needs to engage with fans. He needs to engage with alum, and just understanding that and acknowledging those aspects of running a program have been worlds different than what we've seen with UCLA last year. And people are responding, I think, right? You see him putting on fan events for spring practice, over the course of that, and fans are showing up to that. You see recruits showing up for that. And ultimately, you're seeing donors show up now. NIL has been boosted since he's taken over. He's engaging with it, trying to drum up money for NIL and recruiting. And ultimately, I think so far, so good. Like, we're excited. I think he's doing all the right things. What he needs to do now is actually win on the field. And I think that's going to be a little harder said than done this upcoming season, but we'll get into that. But ultimately, so far, I think Coach Foster's been doing a great job. We're excited, and I'm looking forward to seeing the product he actually puts out on the field.
I think the first thing that excites me is that there's passion. There's a little and there's not juice maybe to like on a national level, but for us there's some juice again. I mean, we have a coach that is intent on doing the job of a coach. And I know that's a low bar to set here, but like that's kind of what the deal was, right? I mean, we have someone that wakes up, is excited to do their job, is putting the hours in clearly, and is like doing the hard work of building back the infrastructure. Because again, what was going on with Chip Kelly, I think it's beyond like how many games were you winning. In this day and age in 2024, the infrastructure of UCLA football, from fan engagement, from donors, from NIL, from the high school recruiting apparatus that, to set up around you, was on the ground in a way that it never should have been. And Deshaun Foster's taken the challenge and is doing the hard work of getting that back up. But I would go beyond just saying that he's working hard. I think in a short amount of time, he's had some good wins, more than I thought a coach coming in February could have. In a very short time, I think he's built the UCLA NIL pool to a much better place. With those wins, he's gone out and gotten some good wins in the transfer portal to help shore up some of the holes that we have in our roster next year, and there were a lot of them. Part of the reason Chip Kelly was looking to skip town to pretty much anywhere he could find this past offseason is because it was going to catch up to him this year. All the years of not recruiting and whatnot. Deshaun Foster is taking the hard work of trying to plug the holes like where he can, whatever meaningful way he can. fan engagement. I mean, this is something that I think is different in Los Angeles compared to other areas. I mean, you have to like show media and fans and such that like they matter to you, because otherwise it's a distracted market. And so Deshaun Foster has brought back a lot of the things that UCLA traditionally used to do. He's brought back a spring game. He's opened up spring practices for people to come and attend. He's opened up media access a lot more than previously with Chip Kelly. Like the previous coaches were doing it, but it wasn't happening before. And so all these different things has led to this place where, you know, UCLA's high school recruiting, like the irons in the fire are much more at this point, at this time of year. Like how's this for you? We're hosting visit weekends, right? Like we're offering players, like we're doing the basic things that you need to do as a program, but doing them also with like some levels of success. He's gotten some good recruiting wins. He has a top 150 quarterback committed for the future. So I think Deshaun Foster showing the passion has been a positive, but the way that he's been able to rally the fans around him and just start the recruiting engagement to a better place, I think has been really encouraging, to where he's passed the first test, right? The first test was like, he came from Chip Kelly's staff and he's going to kind of do the same exact things from before. And I think he hasn't done that. He's done quite the opposite of that, and he's done some of it well. Now it's the field. You got to avoid the Chip Kelly start. I think any Power 5 program, you can't recover in this day and age when you go 3-9 and 4-8, like in consecutive years like that. I think you got to avoid that. And if he can do that, I think he has a window where there's enough juice here. There's enough buzz in the Southern California area where, I mean, this is where I think, why it was so frustrating for why UCLA wasn't recruiting so well. Like, you don't have to do much else. You got California in here. If there's buzz in this area, that's the base for your program. And I think, he's starting to lay the foundations for that.
As someone who follows recruiting, who's in those weeds on a daily basis, from where I stand, and I was going to tell you guys this, you should be able to have a better roster than half of this conference simply by just recruiting your area.
Yeah, absolutely.
No joke.
I totally agree. And the wild thing is, I think most people realize that. Everybody who follows UCLA football realizes that. For whatever reason, Chip Kelly didn't realize that, or didn't care to put in any effort to realize that. And, even former coaches, even if they were not, putting good products out on the field, they weren't winning games, at least they were pulling in talent. I mean, you look back to like Rick Neuheisel. Rick Neuheisel brought in enough talent during his tenure. He didn't win a lot, but he brought in enough talent and left enough talent in the cupboard for Jim Mora to come in and immediately start winning football games. To the point where we were always kind of, for those 3 or 4 years, considered kind of dark horse, top 10, 15 type teams. That's the kind of talent that we've gotten. And then Jim Mora took that base and was really able to turn up the recruiting juice there and brought in a lot more talent. It's not that hard. And Coach Foster knows that. He's a local Southern California kid. He has a lot of roots there, and he's tapping into that. And it's like Kevin said, it's benefiting us from a talent recruiting perspective. Like, we're seeing an immediate bump. I mean, the fact that we're sitting, I think last time I checked, we're kind of somewhere in the 30s from a recruiting ranking perspective. The fact that we're just even sitting in that situation is a miracle based on what we were recruiting before he came on board. I mean,
we were 90th last year. 90th.
Yeah. So you shouldn't finish 90.
Firing in Columbus, Ohio. Auto.
Right.
You don't even get to coach that season.
No.
You're done.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just by being in Los Angeles, we should be doing better than 90. Yeah. I think Foster is really ramped that up, and we're not getting a lot of 4 and 5 star guys, but we're getting high quality developmental 3-star guys that might not contribute in year 1, but by year 2, year 3, we might see them actually be good players, and I think that's perfectly fine. But we're seeing those kinds of players come in, and it's building a good foundation for, I think, the future for UCLA football right now.
I got one follow-up question to this, and this is just out of, and I apologize for my ignorance. I'm sure I could have looked this up beforehand, but since I have you guys and your wealth of knowledge here, I'll just have you explain it to all of us. ignorant Big Ten people who maybe don't know much about UCLA. What's the academic standards at UCLA and maybe USC as well, since I haven't got a chance to talk to any of them yet? Like, is that a hindrance to recruiting? Do you have to, things like that when it comes to your school?
Big hindrance. I'll let Kevin get into it because this makes my blood boil sometimes. But
yeah, I mean, there's different ways to skin this cat. So first off, I mean, I'm not. We didn't come here to say this, right? But UCLA, by a lot of rankings and measures out there, #1 public school in the world. So I mean, I know the Michigan fans love to claim that, right? Ooh, don't they? Yeah,
yeah.
Right. So I mean, academic standards are high. Most applied to school in the world, but in the country, by a big margin at that.
Really, too. I didn't know.
By a sizable margin. So there's a lot of things in that realm that can work against UCLA from a recruiting standpoint. That said, if that was the case, then UCLA never would have recruited at a top 15, 20 level, consistently before this. And that's what's happened. I mean, you don't have to recruit like Georgia, right? And our expectations are not to be Georgia, right? We want to be a competitive, nationally competitive program, in whatever that means. And I think that's totally achievable given the recruiting base that's out here. Is it a hindrance? UCLA has a habit of applying weird rules in some cases and not applying other rules in other cases that can get really annoying for a UCLA fan to follow. I can go into all the examples of that, but it is what it is. That said, I mean, if you have a coach, and it goes back to this, if you have a coach that's committed to this and you have a coach that is willing to work for it, we have had in Jim Mora's staff, he got in borderline NCAA qualifiers to UCLA, right? So it can be done. You just have to put some effort into it. And when you do, the results can be good.
Gotcha. Okay. Excellent. Very, the Big Ten's so odd because even Ohio State's, a lot of people don't know this, Ohio State's academic standards are really high.
Ohio State's a good school. Yeah, very good
compared
school.
To what they used to be.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they were taking just about anybody in the 80s and 90s. Oh, you want to go to college? Welcome in. Now it's no, you've got to really apply yourself in high school to get accepted at Ohio State. But that being said, when you have the team up north, as we like to call them, who boast about their academic standards, and then the Northwestern of the world, right, which is not public, it is a private school, so they're more like a Stanford, if you will, or Duke or whatever. It does raise the academic standards in the Big Ten, and of course, the Big Ten likes to boast being an AAU charter schools and all of those things, and the wealth of abundance of shareable resources for research and development on the academic side of things, in the medical field, the engineering fields, and all of these things that us sports people are banging our heads against the wall and going, but all of that stuff really does matter. It really does. And I know sometimes on a sports podcast, it's move on, but at the end of the day, it is nice to have those things available to you to make the world a better place. And so I was curious what you see, what hindrances there might be on the athletic side of things because of academics. So thank you for taking time to answer.
Yeah, I think UCLA really does fit that mold that you just described, right? Really high academic schools throughout the Big Ten. You named the Michigans, Northwestern, etc., Ohio State. UCLA definitely falls into that category. I'll give you another data point for context. I was looking up the acceptance rate for last year. It's sub 10% to get into UCLA. It is an insanely difficult place to get into. I don't think I would have gotten in now if I went in today, and it was still pretty low when we went. So it gets tougher and tougher every year.
But I will say this: my wife and I have this argument all the time. I think school's so much easier for these kids than what we had it. I think the teachers alone. I've seen my stepson's teachers. You guys are getting my stepson's in 8th grade and he's not brought home a piece of homework ever. I'm like, I'm like, how would he's like, we have study hall at the end of every class. I'm like, wait, what? What is going
Do the homework
on?
on the iPad, you know?
Yeah, they'll have iPads that he's not brought home a textbook. I remember bringing home textbooks, and you got the grocery bag, and you made the covers, and then you had people sign it, and you know what I mean? Like, we're really dating myself here. All right, let's talk about your roster, okay? I'll be honest, I don't know who you got. I mean, I started to look at some of the and this is outside of Oregon and Washington and who left USC. I have not paid attention to what's out on the West Coast. And so you guys, this is your opportunity to educate Ohio State fans and Big Ten fans. Here's who you need to be aware of, who's on our roster, who we think by the end of the year is going to be pretty good.
I'll start on the defensive side with a name. I think he's probably one of our only guys that is considered a surefire NFL guy and flirted with transferring this past season, but decided to stay, is Jay Toya on the defensive line. I think he is a guy who is a legitimate NFL kind of defensive tackle, big run stopper, can get in the backfield, big, strong, athletic guy. Losing him to the transfer portal over this past offseason would have been probably disastrous. Keeping him at UCLA actually, I think, gives us a chance to have a competent defense now. He was that important, and I think he is that good that our whole defensive scheme he's like the linchpin for that to work. So I'll throw the defensive side out, but there's a few other guys I think we can probably name on defense, but the other guy I would say on the offensive side is probably Chase Garbers, our quarterback. He really didn't get a great shot last season at starting. If you followed UCLA at all, we had the revolving circus of Dante Moore and Chase Garbers being switched in and out throughout the season, which didn't let either guy really settle in. Garbers has been with the program for a couple of years now, transferred in, and has shown a lot of, poise and at the bare minimum can be a very good game manager type of quarterback. I don't think he's an NFL talent, but he can be a very good college quarterback. And I think this upcoming season, with him being the starter, we'll see some of that talent come out and come to fruition a little bit more. But those are the two guys I would look for. If you're, a Big Ten or Ohio State fan looking at UCLA, I'm sure there's other names. Kevin, you probably have some other guys to talk about. Yeah,
well, I'm going to continue real quick again on Ethan Garbers because I the more I've looked at this, I think he is like a huge key to this next season because the Big Ten is really interesting. You have this like insane top tier, which Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State's kind of like a rung below that, and you have teams like Wisconsin and whatnot who like usually kind of join that mix. So you have this insane top tier, a good middle tier, right? Where you have, the Iowas and Michigan States and such like of the world.
Solid. That's the word I like to use. We have
a solid. Yeah, that's a good one, right?
They'll compete with anybody's middle tier, if you will. They are solid.
Very solid.
Well in bowl games, out of conference. Yep.
And I think UCLA's aim is to make sure that we're closer to that than the next tier right away. And so what do we need to do to differentiate ourselves from the, if we call it the lower tier or the next tier of the Big Ten? I mean, there is some not so good quarterback play in the bottom level of the Big Ten, like really not so good quarterback play there. And Ethan, I think all of them are searching for that game manager that can go in and be competent and, move the chains and not be a hindrance. I fully know and respect the quality of defensive play in the Big Ten, and that does add to this. The defensive coaching is really excellent in the Big Ten. But I think Ethan Garbers, being that game manager plus, if you will, is going to be key in those swing games for us this year when you play the likes of Nebraska and Rutgers and Iowa, right? Where if you can take the game into the fourth quarter and see whose quarterback can make a play, he's going to be super crucial in that. Some other names then to go beyond that. J. Michael Sturdivant, I think, is an intriguing player at wide receiver. He had a really good bowl game. Last year, we all thought that he would be, one of our better players off the bat. But 8 tight end formations and such notwithstanding, we never really got him the ball until that bowl game. But he had a really solid end of the season, particularly when Ethan Garbers came into the lineup. And I think he's someone who has the speed, the athleticism to be a dangerous playmaker, particularly in the new offense of Eric Bieniemy and such, who does value getting the ball on the perimeter. TJ Harden was a good back last year, has kind of that explosiveness and the size to be a good running back on a good version of a UCLA team. Had a good year last year. I'm excited to see kind of how he develops. I think the key to the season is the likes of Jay Toya and such stepping up to stop the run, and then having it so that, on offense, we can find that kind of game manager plus and that above average offense to kind of like keep things moving. If you do that, I think it's very achievable to again, not stay in the bottom rung there and, try to get to that middling point. And I think that's the goal.
We've been doing
the other guy, actually, I'll throw one more name out on the defensive side. It's Kane Medrano at linebacker.
Yeah.
He really stepped up last season. I think we actually have a pretty good linebacking core. It's pretty deep. But he really stepped up. He had a huge coming out party against Utah on the road where that game was absolutely brutal. There was not much good to take out of that. But Kane Medrano really stepped up in that game and kind of continued on and was a key linebacker. So I expect to see him, up his game even more this season, maybe get more involved in pass rushing, since I think we can get into that in a little bit. But that's going to be a key aspect of our team that I think we're going to be weak at. So if he can generate a little bit more of that, keep playing good linebacking, he's going to be a key piece to our defense this season.
We've been doing our top 10 position group, top 10 players in each position group previews as we've been working our way through the offseason here. And 2 names that have popped out to me on UCLA's roster, I want to get you guys' take on them real quick, is Spencer, is it Holstage?
Yeah.
I'm seeing his name a lot. And the tight end, which I love this guy's first name, Maliki Matavio. Help me out with that. I love that kid's name, but I've watched their games a little bit on some film. Solid guys, solid players there.
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Spencer Holstage is going to be definitely a key. Our offensive line was miserable last year, really miserable. The years of not recruiting that position caught up to us. It was, I would say, kind of the reason of the fall of Dante Moore and why he was not, I think, set up to succeed as a freshman. But Spencer Holstage, I think, definitely there were bigger problems than him on the offensive line last year, and him coming back, along with a couple of the transfers that we've added now on the offensive line, I know we're going to get into keys to the season and stuff like that, but I'll go early on that. This right here is for me the real key to the season. It's offensive line and Ethan Garbers, because that's to me the key to, again, winning the swing games. You got to win a couple of those swing games this year. Spencer Holstage and a semblance of an offensive line, because last year it was borderline unsafe for quarterbacks to be back there, and that's kind of what happened.
Borderline, it was unsafe.
Yeah, no, with the injuries that happened to our guys, that's kind of what happened. And so Spencer Holstage stepping up is definitely going to be a big one. And I missed, what was the other one that you said?
Motaval. So Maliki Motaval from a tight end perspective.
You said that so flawlessly.
We've been following this team a little longer. So
I always love it when people talk about Emeka Egbuka, our wide receiver from Washington. And they butchered it. After a while, or JT Tuimoloau. It's you get used to it eventually.
Yeah,
when you
that's what they all call him,
other
right?
teams, you're like,
yeah.
Maliki. So
Motaval's going to be an interesting player, I think, from a tight end perspective. I'm curious to see how Eric Bieniemy utilizes our tight ends, because Chip Kelly obviously used a lot of tight end, and looking at Bieniemy using guys like Travis Kelce in Kansas City, obviously big component of his offense historically as well. So I'm curious to see how he utilizes him. Our tight end room is pretty thin. We've had a couple of injuries. So Hudson Habermel was going to be a big contributor. He tore his ACL, I believe. We had a couple of transfers out. So Monteval is going to be a key piece to that room. He was a transfer from Oregon. He played pretty well last season. We had a pretty deep tight end room. So for him to step up kind of as full-time starter, I'm really interested to see how he's going to transition to that kind of workload. I think he's a very solid player. He's a very good blocker generally. I think his catching has gotten a lot better. He's a big guy, so he can definitely play the position well. So yeah, let's see how he kind of transitions into a new offense with the new workload and what he's going to look like and what his role will look like. It is definitely going to be an interesting player to watch. But yeah, he's a good player, and yeah, cool name, a fun name to say.
Yeah. All right, let's get to the fun stuff now, guys. So let's take a look at this schedule.
I want to hide from this.
As we go through the schedule, I want you guys to we'll take it kind of in halves and then expound upon maybe the strengths and weaknesses of your football team as we work our way through the schedule and what you kind of expect here.
I'll give you my first impression of this schedule. This feels like a season we beat USC and then lose to Fresno State, because that's something UCLA would do.
It's happened. Yeah. Whenever you hear Fresno State's that it's harder than the average Group of 5 team, it's because they played UCLA.
Yeah.
All right. Let's just start off with this. Like, you're in the Big Ten, guys. This should never happen. You don't go to Hawaii to start the season. I understand it's a nice trip for the alumni, right? Like, this feels like when Notre Dame last year went to Ireland to start their season, right? And it was like it set them back. They were playing behind the 8 ball after that the rest of the year. Now, you do get the bye in week 2 to kind of make up for that. That's nice. But do yourselves a favor. Tell the athletic director, don't ever schedule another Group of 5 on the road. You don't do that, guys. You're in the Big Ten now. Come see us, right? But I get it. If you're going to go to one, that's a good one to go to. I can't blame you there. Then you get Indiana. You go to Indiana to start your
Indiana's a home. Play. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. You get Indiana come to you. That's right. And then you go to LSU, or is that like a mutual?
No, that's at LSU. Yeah.
It was a home and home.
Yeah.
Okay. And then back to back with Oregon. Holy smokes. And then
I break the schedule down. And, I look at this schedule. First off, a lot of travel. Hawaii, LSU, Rutgers, Penn State.
Yes.
It's not just travel in one direction. It's travel in multiple directions. So there's a lot of travel out there.
I wrote an article about this for the College Huddle not too long ago. Let me see if I can find it while you guys are kind of dissecting this, about how many miles UCLA will have to travel to start the
Usually, if you go to Hawaii, you get a 13th game, and we've opted out of that 13th game because look at the amount of travel we got here, right? We've basically said we don't need any more of this. Let's just call it a day. And so, even though we have at Hawaii, we're not even getting the benefit of playing at Hawaii. Like we've chosen to opt out of that. As we start to look at this schedule, I think it's really important. Like we talked about those swing games. We get, I think, one of them pretty early on, which, it really needs to not be a swing game and really needs to be a win. And that's Indiana. You hope you can get by Hawaii and Indiana, but you get a loss early on there to one of those, and then it's like, whoa, we're really heading for that cratering event this season, right? This is really going to be like the 3-win season that we all were dreading. I think you got to get past that, because you get past that, UCLA would be lucky to win a game from September 21st to October 5th. I think anyone would be lucky to win a game, unless you're one of Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, in that tier, right? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just under 27,000 miles.
Wow, that's wild.
That's insane, guys.
That's wild.
This football team is going to be so tired by the end of the season that no, Fresno State probably will. I mean, you're going to be so beat up and tired.
You could throw Fresno State in any part of that schedule though, and I'm going to chalk that up as an L. We've had too much history with losing to Fresno State. So.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! And Fresno starts the year off, I think, against Michigan.
Yeah, they start at Michigan,
and I'm like, you know what? You know how Michigan are. You know, they're going to win another national championship according to their fan base. I'm like, well, good luck not knowing everybody's plays this time. Sorry, that was an Ohio State low blow there. Fresno State are Big Ten, like they are Power 5 killers. They beat Purdue last year at Purdue. You guys are talking them up. Like, I keep telling Michigan, don't sleep on them. You guys did lose to Appalachia State, not too long ago. Like, Fresno State is no Appalachian State. They are for real. But anyways, I mean, I'm looking at this schedule. There is nothing easy on this schedule at all. I mean, even Minnesota's solid. And guys, don't sleep on Rutgers. Rutgers
no, not
is
at all.
Really, really good. And they have the easiest schedule in the Big Ten. They avoid Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon all this year. There is a world where Rutgers goes 10-2, 11-1.
Our third guy, Isaiah, who started the show with us, who pops in and out, he's actually at law school at Rutgers right now. So he's been beating that drum for a while. He's like, look, man, Rutgers is going to be good. Just don't sleep on them. And so we're familiar with Rutgers and them being a pretty good dark horse this season. So we're not taking that trip for granted. I think, traveling cross country, especially to go beat them, is not going to be an easy task at all. Yeah. Like you said, none of these games are going to be easy. It's at best, some of these are coin flips. At worst, some of these are going to be complete drubbings. So
do this for me. Answer this question. And we can go from here, but I want to get this covered because I think this is the main thing that people want to know. What's the strength and weakness of your football team? And with that, what do you believe the floor and ceiling for your football team is?
I think that, so in terms of, strengths, I think it has to be stopping the run because and I think we will be good against the run because most of what we returned from last year from what was a pretty good defense for the first time like in 6 years last year was interior defensive linemen and linebackers. That's a formula for stopping the run. And so I think stopping the run, and then on the other side, I think it's got to be some form of, again, quick passing attack. You have a competent quarterback that can get the ball out to playmakers and such. I think there is a version of an offense that we can build that can play to our strengths and do well over there. Weaknesses, I think it starts with what we lost. We had some real good edge rushers last year. Leatu Latu's not going to play for the Indianapolis Colts. Right, was drafted highly in the first round. We lost Gabriel Murphy, Grayson Murphy. These are all really good contributors. And last year, I would say edge rush was the strength of our team. This year, it's probably the question mark of our team because all those guys are gone, and there hasn't been a whole lot in the way of recruiting to replace them, over the years. And so that, I think, is kind of the big question mark that I have, along with, again, offensive line last year was so miserable. I think we've plugged some holes there. I think we have the right pieces returning. We talked about Sir Holstage, to where there's hope for a turnaround. We'll have better coaching this year. Juan Castillo from the Kansas City Chiefs, he's coming over. That seems to be going well over there, so there's hope. And so as I look at the schedule and we translate that, right, like what does that mean? LSU, Oregon, and Penn State, I'll be happy if we're competitive and we can have a nice, moral victory there and call it a day. But some of these swing games, as I look at the schedule, Indiana, at Rutgers, at Nebraska, Iowa. Washington's losing a ton, like a ton. And so at Washington, the rivalry game has always been kind of a toss-up, and then Fresno State. Particularly those Big Ten games against Indiana, Rutgers, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota. What they all have in common is terrible quarterback play. And so, I mean, how do you win those kind of games? I don't think we're going to be able to completely outscore them or anything because, again, the quality of defensive coaching in this league and the quality of defense and line of scrimmage play is at a much higher standard than I think what we've been used to, like in the Pac-12. I think we saw that particularly for when the top end teams played, in the last postseason, like the national title game and things of that nature. But there's a world here where if we can stop the run and we have competent quarterback play, that there's a formula there to go and win enough of those coin flip games to where you can crack a bowl game out of this. You can crack a winning season out of this. And that, I think, is like the hope for this season. In the world where our offensive line hasn't improved from last year, and, if you don't have an edge rush, then even the most incompetent offense can find a way to get it done against you. You give any like Division I quarterback enough time, team's able to run the ball on you, eventually like you get figured out. That's the formula to the crater season. That's the formula where we lose these swing games and we end up with like a four win season. Like that's that. So I think I can see both sides of that coin, shaken out. I'm really interested to see how it goes. Again, like completely different style of football than I think we've been used to out in the Pac-12. A lot more line of scrimmage football. But again, like given that the strength of our team should be, again, interior defensive line and such, like I don't think we're completely inept from dealing with that. I think there's a world where you can do that, stop the run, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how our new defensive coordinator, Coach Malloy, steps up because he has not coordinated a defense in quite a while. He was our defensive line coach, so there's some history here. But can he actually step up and put together a defense that can stop the run with the talent that he has? Because I do think we have some good run stoppers like Jay Toya and other folks on the team, but is he going to be a good enough coach to actually coordinate this defense at a high level? But yeah, it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
So do I hear you guys saying that you believe the floor is 4 wins and the ceiling is 8?
I'll say floor for me is like 2. I can see
that's
us.
right. Like real crazy.
Yeah.
Like, it's possible. The years of not recruiting, the years of keeping the talent level where it was, catches up to you when you play a schedule like this. Where again, I go back to the Big Ten West analogy, right? Like you can have the year where you don't play Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, and then you have a 8-9 win year. And the next year you play Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, get blown out by all of them. And then like the knock-on effects from that kind of carry on through the year. And so, which way that goes for us, like that's, I think the interesting thing. We can see a 2 to 4 win season. I think I could see a 6. How you get to 8 wins is if you upset a team and then like win those swing games. I think more realistically, like 6 or 7 is like a good place to shoot for.
Yeah, that would be my ceiling as well. 6 to 7, win those coin flip games, win those 2 to begin the season, and I think getting into a lower tier bowl game would be a huge win for this and something to build off of for Coach Foster from a recruiting perspective and getting the fan base even more excited. I think that would be a very, very successful season for UCLA.
I just have a couple more questions. Thank you guys for all your time. You've been more than gracious giving us all this.
It's been fun.
You guys are very easy to talk to. Usually these last
you as well. Minutes. Appreciate that.
It's like we're an hour in. I'm like, oh my gosh. I have a theory, and it's to be honest, it's selfishly a Big Ten theory, Ohio State theory, a Midwest theory. And this isn't necessarily directed towards you as UCLA, but maybe more so the 4 teams coming in, and then just the West Coast teams in general. As the season wears on, I believe the physicality of this conference is going to catch up with the West Coast teams. They're not used to it, coupled with the travel. And by the end of the season, outside of maybe Oregon, who I think maybe has the most depth so far out of the 4 teams from the West, that by the end of the season, the 4 West Coast teams are going to be beat up. Do you think there's some legitimacy to this?
I think we lost Kevin, but I can try to answer that. I think so. I think there's probably some truth to that. I don't think, and I'll speak for the LA schools because that's probably what we're most familiar with. I think that neither of these teams, both UCLA and Southern Cal, are built for physical football day in and day out. That being said, I think Foster understands that and has been trying at least, and again, very quick turnaround. So to be fair to him, he's not going to be able to plug these gaps in the one season. I think he is trying to prepare for that. So I think this upcoming season, yes, it is going to be a slog. I think the physicality is really going to impact us later in the season. Give it a season or two. I think UCLA can catch up. I think we can, hang if we recruit right. If Foster, doesn't have that cratering season, I think we can adjust to it. It's just going to take time. That being said, there have been teams in the Pac-12 that have played a little bit more physical, right? Stanford for a number of years, did that. Might not be at the same level as all the Big Ten teams, but they were doing something similar. So we've seen that style of play before. It's just going to matter how can we adjust to it day in, day out. I think it's going to take some time. So I agree that it will take some time for teams to adjust, but I think the coaches should realize that and will probably recruit to that if they're smart, because we're the minority coming into the conference, right? Everybody's not going to adjust to us. I think we're going to need to adjust to them and assimilate.
Yeah, and so to kind of bounce back with you on that, that's why I say as the season wears on, it catches up with you. At first, at the beginning of the season, I think your athleticism should be able to beat an Indiana. I do. Teams like that. But when you play a Nebraska, an Iowa, a Minnesota, a week, boom, boom, boom. By the time you get to that end, you are worn down. And then couple that with the travel involved with it, that is going to be – that's a double whammy. Not only are you beat up physically, but then you're tired on top of it. And I just that's been my going theory. So it sounds like my theory might have some legs to it. That's why I say if you're going to play the West Coast teams, you want them on the back end of your schedule. That's my theory. I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways I think to talk about this. From a UCLA standpoint, because of the specific nature of the travel we have in the non-league as well as the league, I think I'm not a big believer in giving coaches mulligans for a year. But in this specific instance, just given, coming in February and everything that surrounds it, and the schedule and stuff that comes up, this could go a direction that we don't want it to go for UCLA this year. And we hope it doesn't. But let's put that aside for a second, because I think, will the West Coast teams, who's going to adjust to who? And I think about this, I've thought about this answer in terms of the tiers again, right? I think the top tier in the Big Ten, particularly the style, if you think about how Michigan has been playing these past several years, right? Michigan basically has been playing if you took the Wisconsin and Iowa big line of scrimmage teams and plugged in top 15 level talent in it, and what would it look like? And that's basically been what Michigan has been. And I think that is a level that the current Pac-12 schools coming in, that level of physicality at the top end, they would struggle to match. Ohio State I would say Ohio State and Oregon, very similar programs and how they've operated the last several years, right? Oregon's kind of been Ohio State West, but that top tier, I think they've been recruiting to a certain type and developing to a certain type for a long time. And it's going to be hard there. When we get now to the like second half of the league, this is where I think it's going to be really interesting because, you know, how do you now define success as an Iowa fan? For years, you could be in the Big Ten West and say that I went to the Big Ten championship game, right? Or how do you define success? I mean, that's just one example, right? But any of these teams, right? How do you define success? Because the way you built your program was, well, this is who I'm going to play, right? And like every single year. And so based on that, this is how I got to put together my program. And for the most part, that was we need to build a really good defensive line, a good defense, and have an offense that won't throw a bunch of picks. And that was basically the format to put your program together. And this is where I think it get really interesting because now in a world where you no longer can say success is winning the West, right? Like you're going to have teams on your schedule like Oregon, like USC and Lincoln Riley and, you know, Washington, and hopefully, you know, soon in short order, UCLA, that are going to have much better skill talent and are going to have, you know, much better talent in the other areas to where, you know, we can't just hang our hat on like winning 10-3 every single week against each other. We have to also play other styles as well. And so that's where I think this will get interesting. You know, I think at the top end, you know, if you're not competitive at the line of scrimmage, it's going to be hard to be at the top end of this league. It's just the facts. It's going to be hard to be at the middle level of this league. Right. But now, like, who separates themselves from that next tier? I think that's where could the oil and water mix and go the other way. Like that's where I think I could find it a little interesting.
We literally have teams in this conference that celebrate the punt.
Yeah.
Just let that sink in. like we really do. It really is a thing where Iowa won a game without scoring a touchdown, and their fan base loved it. It's like, okay, but
yeah, they wear the shirt, right? Like we love the punter and all that.
Oh yeah. I forget how many punts he had. It was like 70 some punts, and it's like our punter literally jumps. He's like I'm gone because I punted 12 times last year, and Iowa's over there like I punted 12 times in a game last week. Like it's literally so. It's just a very interesting clash of styles. Last question. What's your expectations? You kind of already answered this, but maybe throw in this one with it since you guys kind of already answered that question. What new rivalry would you like to see? So, you know, kind of mix those together and close out with a conclusion.
Ooh, that's a tough one. You have any thoughts, Kevin?
New rivalry. So expectations. I'm going to answer that two ways, right? Which again, like we've talked about what we want to do for this year. We want to try and make a bowl game. That's our hope for this year, right? What's our broader expectation of the Big Ten? I think that's like an interesting place to go. Which I think again is, look. I mean, we're pretty self-aware here. Like we're not trying to go and compete for the national championship in the next 4 years here, right? So like. The level of Ohio State and Michigan and, you know, Georgia and stuff, that's one thing. But again, the tiers in the Big Ten, can we be in that like middle tier? Can we get to like that Wisconsin tier right there where like, you know, we're nationally competitive. We have a ranking next to our name most weeks, if not every week. Right. And like, you're right there. Like, and that's kind of the history of UCLA. Like you talked about, you know, the older Buckeye fans talking about the games in the 70s and 80s and such. Like for many years, like the history of the AP poll, the thing that everyone likes to use, right? Like what's your history in the AP poll? UCLA is a historically top 25 program, like was a top 20 program for many years until this train wreck came around for these last, you know, few years, right? And so our history is just about that. It is about like the level that a Wisconsin has been in the Big Ten. And I think that's the level that we should aspire to at the very least get back to if nothing else. You know, it is what it is right now, but that's, I think, and then, so what rivalry would we like to start? I know I grew up a fan of Michigan. But you know, I think, I went to the Rose Bowl this past year just to check out the game and whatnot. I understand why people say what they say about Michigan fans now and their alumni. Let's just say I understand it.
Okay.
And I think, you know, that would be pretty fun. You know, two massive public school brands that kind of like go against each other that have a history of athletic tradition. I mean, Michigan, the winningest program in college football. UCLA has, you know, the massive tradition of athletic excellence, across sports, right? Over 110 national championships, the basketball legacy that we have, and so on and so forth. That I think that would be like a fun, battle of the big brands, if you will. I'm looking forward to all those games, honestly. Like I don't look forward to playing Ohio State in our current position right now, but I think seeing, going to the Horseshoe and seeing Ohio State come to the Rose Bowl, like how much fun is that going to be?
Oh,
I think
it'd be a blast.
It's going to be a blast. I'll throw
it's on
out
my bucket list, boys. It's on my bucket list.
Hey, come out here. We'll show you a good time. I'll throw out my personal rivalry.
Okay.
I want a UCLA Rutgers rivalry to split up just to see Isaiah meltdown, because that would be fun. That would be a blast.
I've heard more about Rutgers recruiting this year than I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And for good reason. I get it, but I've heard way more about it than I ever cared to.
They are doing well.
They're doing really well. Expectation wise, my expectation, I guess, is not to have the crater year. And I think to not have a crater year, 5 to 6 wins, I would consider not a crater year. Ideally 6 wins and get into a lower tier bowl somewhere. And I think it's doable. I think Coach Foster has the momentum and he has the right coaches that seemingly around him to pull that off. And I think we have enough talent on the roster to do that. And I think we've shored up some of the gaps that we would have had, 4 months ago. But it's going to be a tough ask. But that's what I expect. I think that winning 2, 3, 4 wins is not gonna cut it, and I think it's gonna set us back a long way if we don't get over that 5, 6 game hump. So that's my expectation. Hopefully we can do it. Wouldn't be surprised if we didn't, but I'm also just a very cynical sports fan.
You sound like me. The title of my show last Thursday was Ohio State's nightmare scenario, where we go 11-1 with a loss in Eugene, Oregon, and Rutgers goes undefeated and gets to play the Ducks in the Big Ten championship. And we're sitting at home going, we even beat Michigan and we still don't get a big like that's the nightmare scenario. But let me throw this one out at you guys, because I've been thinking about this. UCLA's got the most, in my opinion, next to Kentucky and North Carolina, the most historic basketball program in the country. Love John Wooden, read his books. I was a basketball coach, so I love the man. Purdue has been the most consistent basketball program we've had the last couple decades. You both have gold, right? And the different shades of gold, but you both have gold. And Purdue, of course, they love to play with choo-choo trains. And there's a story where back in the time when we were trying to drive the trains out to the west, when they finally connected east to west, they drove the golden spike into the railroad ties, and that was to signify you can now go from east coast to west coast via train. I think UCLA and Purdue should have the golden spike rivalry trophy.
I'll throw another connection out between those two schools. John Wooden played at Purdue.
What?
Yeah,
I didn't know this.
There's a John Wooden statue at Purdue, so there's some interesting basketball ties across those teams. Totally agree. That'd be a fun rivalry to have. Yeah, them, Indiana, spike. Obviously.
Indiana's
Wooden and Bobby Knight really didn't like each other, so there's some history there. Plus, we had Steve Alford as our coach, and we absolutely loathe him. So. Yeah, there's some interesting basketball rivalries I think that can develop. I think that
we need one because and it looks like this is going to continue at least for the foreseeable future. But the big rivalry that we had, right, was with Arizona in the league, and that may continue for some time here. But like in conference play, we definitely need some of those rivalries to emerge. I think there's a lot of candidates in basketball for that. But Purdue. That connection's an interesting one. The golden spike. We'll start talking about it.
Yeah.
My buddy who's a Michigan fan has still not forgiven UCLA for beating them in the Elite Eight a few years ago. So that's there's some Michigan fans looking for a rivalry there.
When you
there's a lot of basketball. When you guys
start talking college basketball, we're gonna check out, guys.
Yeah, we'll be here another 3 hours, but that's the story for another day.
Yeah, so I've been trying to create some new rivalries for the West Coast teams, and I think the Golden Spike would be cool. Maybe you guys can hook up with the Boiler Express podcast. Good friends of mine, started the College Huddle with us. You guys can, maybe you guys can make a rivalry trophy, and you can pass it back and forth with each other.
Love it. I love that idea.
We have one with them it's a hard hat, half Purdue, half Ohio State. And we got a new one starting up with the Common Fan, the Nebraska guys. We're going to have a rivalry trophy. So
that's awesome.
We should create the Golden Spike. That would be cool.
The shipping costs are a little rougher now, though, coming to the West Coast all the way to Midwest. So
yeah, shipping's going to be interesting on that bad boy. Thank you so much, guys, for your time. You've been more than gracious. Almost an hour and a half. I apologize, but it's been a blast.
It's been fun.
Thank you so much, guys.
Awesome.
Where can everybody catch the Bruin Source at?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on X or Twitter, whatever it's called, at Bruin Source. We're pretty active on there, so feel free to tweet at us. To listen to the actual show, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the big podcast platforms. We're around, always looking for feedback. Leave us reviews, comments, whatever you want. We'll probably respond unless it's inappropriate or nasty. Then we probably won't. But we don't get too many of those. So yeah, that's where to find us. And of course, we're on thecollegehuddle.com, so you can find the show there as well.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome.
All right, and we are back. Thank you so much to Bruin Source on that interview. I hope you enjoyed that. Fantastic guys. Chris, let's dive into their roster a little bit. Now, they did a little bit. They talked a little bit about some of the guys who we should be aware of in their interview. But I want to look at their roster from our perspective as Ohio State fans. So if you don't mind, let's just take a look at this here real fast, Chris. So offensively, we know about the tight end. And boy, did they pronounce that name much better than we did. Maliki Matevo, I think, or Matavio or something like that. I've already forgotten how well they said it. He's good. The offensive line should be a little bit better. They've got some playmakers in the skill set position, but they are super high on Ethan Garbers, the quarterback. They think that this team, if they're going to have any success, it's going to be behind the arm of Ethan Garbers. Chris, what do you think of this offense and what their potential is?
I just don't see a lot, Eric. I mean, I like their tight end a lot. I think he's got some natural ability. I like the receiver Michael Studevant a lot.
But like they said, they brought up a good point. That's under Chip Kelly's offense, and Chip uses the tight end.
He uses the tight ends. And he likes to stretch the field with the tight ends,
and he's not there.
Which is why you had the big yards per catch out of this guy. On the line, Spencer Holstage, I think is a good player. I think he's going to be solid on the line. I think the big questions are Garber at quarterback and Michael Carmody at left tackle.
If I was to glean anything from that interview, as Garber goes, so will the Bruins go this year. If he can have a really good year, they have got a shot to maybe eke out 5-6 wins.
Yeah, I mean, given their coach, I think their running backs are going to be solid because Deshaun Foster was a very solid performer both in college and in the pros at running back. I think he'll have the running back room in shape, but I'm not as sold on Garber as they are.
And as this season goes on, keep in mind, no one in college football is going to travel as much as UCLA. They literally start the season by flying out to Hawaii first before they even fly to the East Coast, several times.
Which when we get into my predictions, that's kind of interesting.
All right, let's take a quick look at the defense now, Chris. So defensively, as we scroll down here on our lads, they are high on their linebackers. Us not so much.
No.
As we were doing a lot of the previews, we took a look at some of their linebackers, including Jalen Davis. But there's really nobody on this defense, I think, that pops out at you. And as they talked about, Deshaun really had to plug some holes on this roster, and particularly on the defensive side. And so I think one of the things that you're going to notice this season, Chris, from the Bruins is as the season progresses, I think defensively, these guys are going to lose their legs and they're going to be tired. They're going to get tired by the end of the season.
Yeah. I'm not real confident defensively in these guys at all. Like you said, there's no name on that list that strikes fear that's at all an intimidating factor. You got 4 transfers coming in and starting. At least that is the projected starters. And you know what? They're in big, big positions when you look at the Big Ten. One of them is at edge. And then you got 2 safeties and a nickelback that are all – I mean, you are in a conference now. I mean, yeah, you had USC before, but you've got Oregon and Ohio State, who I think are going to be 2 of the most prolific offenses in the country. USC, Lincoln Riley is going to air out that ball. If Drew Aller has any kind of a year, Penn State's going to put that ball in the air. I'm trying to be gracious.
Well, when Wisconsin's not going to throw the football.
Wisconsin may surprise you a little.
Rutgers might throw the ball a little more than they did last year.
Throw that ball around a little bit, and you know what? Don't be surprised. I mean, this is just a conference that you've got 3 to 4 solid aerial attacks in.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But they've seen that. They've ran into Oregon before. They're used to playing Oregon. I think UCLA is just starting a rebuild. Let's be honest. They're just starting a rebuild, Chris. And the Big Ten did them 0 favors.
Oh, that schedule is ridiculous.
Let's take a look at it because, again, we showed this during the interview, but let's look at it one more time. You start off on the road at Hawaii. That should never happen. You should never play a G5 school on the road when you're a Big Ten team. I'm sorry. They get a bye after that beautiful trip to Hawaii. They take on Indiana to start the year. If they're going to get a Big Ten win, it's right here. They need to make hay in those first 2 games, and Indiana's one of them. Because they're on the road at LSU. That's an L. Then they take on Oregon at home. That's an L. Then they go on the road to the East Coast to take on Penn State. That's probably going to be an L. They get Minnesota at home. I think Minnesota is just going to ground and pound them to death. Then they got to go back to the East Coast again, this time all the way to Piscataway, New Jersey to take on Rutgers. That's an L. Then keep in mind, Hawaii's not like next door to them, okay? That's a long flight too, even from California. So, yeah, no one's traveling as much as them. They get a bye. Then they go to the heartland of the country to take on Nebraska. Then they get Iowa at home. Then they go fly north to take on Washington up in Seattle. Then they take on crosstown rival USC. And as those boys pointed out to us, Fresno State is not a gimme to them either. Fresno's beaten them a couple times. This might be the toughest schedule in the exact opposite of what Rutgers gets is what UCLA has to deal with. And there's no Ohio State, there's no Michigan on this on the schedule. You've got them at 0-8, 0-9, excuse me. There's my one mistake right there. I always have a mistake on these graphics. You have them at 0-9 in the Big Ten. I got them at 1-8. JR's got them at 2-7 in the Big Ten. 2-10 overall for me. 2-10 for you. JR's got them 4-8. Let me guess. Your wins are Hawaii and Fresno State and 10 losses in between. My two wins are Hawaii and Indiana. They're at the very beginning of the season, and then 10 straight after that to end the season. JR is going with 2 wins for them, and he's got 4-8 overall. Keep in mind the Las Vegas has these guys at 5.5. I'm telling you right now, JR, or anybody in general, but you, Chris, we should go hammer the under here.
Absolutely. Absolutely hammer the under. And I don't even know where JR thinks he's getting 4 wins from. I really don't. I mean, God, JR has done nothing but really stir up some stuff there with his predictions the last few weeks, because I'll tell you, they make no sense to me. But this is what I would say to the fans of UCLA. Don't bail on it. Like you said, Eric, this is a rebuild. Don't bail on it, and don't bail on Deshaun Foster out of the gate. I think he's got the potential to be a solid coach there.
JR's 4 wins are, I just looked them up for you, Hawaii, Indiana, Minnesota, Fresno State. I think Minnesota's much better than what JR thinks.
I agree.
Like, share, subscribe. Thank you again to the Bruin Source for coming on and doing this preview with us. We're not going to see UCLA this year, Buckeye fans. We don't have to worry about them, but I'm glad they're in the Big Ten. I think they have gorgeous jerseys. If you watched yesterday's video, you found out.
Blue pansies.
We will see UCLA in the future, but I am going to catch a couple of UCLA games this year just to see how they fare in the Big Ten and see if my predictions about how the season's going to go for them, how it's going to fare out. Again, like, share, subscribe. Let us know in the comments below what you think of the Bruins season. Are you like Chris and I? Do you only see 2 wins? Are you a little bit more on the positive side like JR and think that they might squeak out 4? Or is there some kind of scenario where you think they might be able to go bowling at the end of the year and somehow squeak out 6 wins? Let us know in the comments below. We would love to have that discussion with you. We'll be having another Big Ten preview coming your way very, very soon. So be on the lookout for that. Chris, we're 5 down. 13 more to go. Till next time, OH.
IO.
Go Bucks.